As I said, my name is Karen Carter. I'm really privileged to be able to be involved with this organization, BAND, which stands for Black Artists Networks in Dialogue. The driver for much of what we do is the notion of networks, the understanding that Black cultural identities and communities are plural, and that if you hail from one part of this country, or even frankly as a Torontonian part of the city, the way your identity is constructed may be very different, partly because of whether your history goes back to founding Indigenous Black communities that were here before Canada was Canada, or if your African Indigenous identity is attached to coming from different parts of the continent here as an immigrant more recently, or if you're hailing from Europe or the Caribbean or somewhere in the Americas, that the complexity of our identities denoted and required us to think about different networks and different ways for dialogue, both within our communities as well as outside of them with the broader public, to help educate, to fight basic things like racism and anti-oppression and colonial ideas around who we should or shouldn't be. So our history with TD Bank goes back quite far, actually, to 2011. We've been doing Black History Month programming with them. And we've learned a lot through that programming and being able to do things across the country. And in the last couple of years, we've decided to start to do more regionally and to partner with organizations. And so we're really happy that the team at Uplift Black wanted to partner with us. I will, at this time, just acknowledge the fact that I am in Toronto, and that I am in this city. We are on the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, who are this land is their home, both currently and historically. But we also know that there are many First Nations that call Toronto home, as well as Inuit and Métis people. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and also signed by Chippewa nations. We are, I think, as Black people, as people of African descent, particularly aware of what it means to state such things like land acknowledgements, because for us at BAND, there's a heightened awareness of the requirement and the responsibility we have as Black people to be allies in the fight for Indigenous communities, for human rights and social justice, because of our own fight. So with that said, I'm gonna hand this over to Shelley and let her take over. Again, thank you all for joining us. I'm sure you'll enjoy the discussion. I know both Janie and Dr. Thompson, and I know they're brilliant, engaging women. So enjoy.
Thank you for the introduction, Karen. Hello, everyone. I'm Shelley Skinner. I am the president and founder of Uplift Black. I'm excited to be here today to discuss stories, Black and Canadian stories of service, and to expand on the storytelling and the history of Black Canadians and their contributions to the world that we have today, to living here on what is called Canada, these lands. I want to first acknowledge where I am situated. So Uplift Black is actually, we work regionally within Simcoe County currently. And so Uplift Black would like to acknowledge that our organization is based on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The local bands consist of the Chippewa Tri-Council, who are made up of the Bosale First Nation, Georgina Island First Nation, and Rama First Nation. We would like to acknowledge the Wendat Nation, Huron, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. Today, this land is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. Thank you. All right, so just a little bit about our speakers today. So first I'd like to introduce, first I want to say thank you to Karen and to Band Gallery for collaborating with Uplift Black and to mentoring us on doing this work, as we are a new grassroots organization. And it is collaborations like working with rooted organizations like Band that allow us to build our capacity to continue this work within Simcoe County. So thank you so much to Karen and Band Gallery, Claudia, and to TD for allowing us to have this space to share this work. So I'd like to introduce first Dr. Cheryl Thompson. So in 2022, Dr. Cheryl Thompson joined performance at X University at the rank of assistant professor. She was previously faculty in creative industries from 2018 to 2021. She is the author of Uncle, Race, Nostalgia, and the Politics of Loyalty, and Beauty in a Box, Detangling the Roots of Canada's Black Beauty Culture. Dr. Thompson is currently working on her third book on Canada's history of blackface as performance and anti-Black racism. This book is based on research conducted with the assistance of multiple social sciences and humanities research council grants. The first, funded through an Insight Development Grant, will produce an open source resource website and video series. The second, funded through a Connection Grant, is in collaboration with Toronto-based film company Pink Moon Studio. Together, they are co-producing a feature documentary film on Canadian blackface. In 2021, Dr. Thompson was a recipient of the Ontario Early Researcher Award titled Mapping Ontario's Black Archives Through Storytelling. This project aims to catalog Ontario's Black archival collections and through ethnographic interviews with the province's creative community, collect stories and the collections that will culminate with a public exhibition curated by Dr. Thompson and her research team, which includes postdoctoral fellow Dr. Karen Cyrus. In addition to publishing in academic journals, magazines, and newspaper, Dr. Thompson has also appeared on numerous podcasts and media platforms in Canada and internationally. Dr. Thompson holds a PhD in Communication Studies from McGill University. She has previously held a Banting Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of Toronto Centre for Theatre, Drama, and Performance Studies, and the University of Toronto's Mississauga's Department of English and Drama. In 2021, Dr. Thompson was named to the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Quite the resume. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Thompson. You can take it away.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Whenever I hear that bio, I think, geez, I've been busy. It doesn't feel like that when you're just doing work that you're called to do, right? I'm not really tabulating the work. I'm just kind of doing it. And then people read it back to me and I'm always shocked, like I've been busy. So hi, everyone. I am going to share my screen because I do have a short slide presentation that's going to accompany my words. What I really want to do in the time that I have here sharing my screen is to really just go through this idea of how you document stories. Like where do you go? I think often when you're not an academic and you haven't been trained, obviously you have a PhD, you get trained in research methods and you learn how to do certain things. When you're just a private citizen, often you don't know what to do. And maybe you have, you know, your own personal collection and you're thinking, oh, how do I interrogate this? So I just wanted to like talk a little bit about how you simplify the story, and also to Karen and Shelley's points about understanding sort of the nuances of our geography. So thinking about the geographies of space and place and race, that where you are situated in this country, in this province, in the city, in the town, in the community actually matters. So you really want to start to scale down your narrative to your locale so that you can really begin to interrogate it. And so the importance of historical documentation for the Black community. One thing to really understand as people of African descent, and that's not just in Canada, that is, I would say, the Americas writ large, as well as people who are of African descent who are located in Europe, because remember, there's a lot of Black people who live in European countries who are of African descent. Our historical access to documenting our histories has always been a challenge. We've always had a hard time finding ourselves in the historical record. And when we do find ourselves, it's sort of a colonial lens that's been taken to our histories. So we're almost having to navigate that to find ourselves. So I just wanted to kind of break down sort of the spaces and places of where you might go and sort of the things that you might look at if you're really trying to document your own community and your own lived experience. So the first thing is, I like this analogy of thinking of it as a family tree. Think of it as ancestry.com or 23andMe, and think about all the ways in which they create that inverted pyramid that starts with you and then it expands out. And one of the ways to do that in the province is to understand that you might live in a particular city, but you actually live in a county. In Canada, we don't, I just find maybe it's an Ontario thing. We don't tend to think of our counties. We think of the city we live in or the town. But the truth is, you really want to start to acknowledge the county that you live in, because counties are also given certain mandates and certain money, literally, from the province to preserve those histories. So we have Essex County. That's what's going on in Windsor right now. That is Essex County. We have Elgin, thinking about sort of the middle southwestern Ontario, Middlesex County. That's London and sort of London and North. We're Niagara region. It's not just Niagara Falls, everyone. There's St. Catharines that's considered part of the Niagara region as well. Fort Erie, Niagara on the Lake, of course, the GTA. And then where many of you might be, Uplift Black, Barrie is in Simcoe. And then there's also gray counties that sometimes they collapse together because of the population size. This is really key, because if you don't know where you are, it's kind of hard for you to navigate in space and place to find yourself. So this is like the overarching kind of sense of where is everyone in the province themselves. And then the next thing is, if you want to start documenting even your own history, you actually have to start by asking yourself questions about yourself. Like, what are you looking to answer about yourself? Maybe you have a photograph of a family, a person in your family that you didn't know, but maybe it's like an old photograph of someone you never met. It's great grandmother, and you want to know, who is this person? What is their story? Well, you actually first have to ask yourself, what are you looking for? Like, what is it that you're trying to answer about that image or the document? And then you want to know, the next thing is, well, where do you get answers to your questions? Like, where do you go? And what I would say to you is that previous slide that I showed you is a great place to start. Our counties have amazing websites with resources for you to go to. And so many people don't know that they can go to the county for resources to find so many things that relate to where you live. So just getting that awareness of that's where you start. Before you think of, say, if you're located in Barrie, before you even study anything about Barrie, go and study Simcoe County. Start there, and then scale down to Barrie, and then scale down to your actual community, wherever you're living. That's actually the scale and scope that you want to approach documenting your history. And then the next thing is to really have a deep of understanding of what are the collections. Like, here's just a little sampling that I put together. There are a lot of archives in the province. There's a lot of like places that you can go that have already done the work to kind of cull things together. So that sometimes when you're trying to document your history, you feel really lost in the beginning. You just don't know where to go. So after you've gone to the county and then to your city, the next step, there are tons of collections out there for you to actually go to their online resource first and just explore, just see what they have in terms of Black history and collections. If you have a question, email them. Believe it or not, people who work in these places, they love getting emails from the public. They live for it. So often we don't email because you think you might be bothering them. No, it's their job. They live for those emails. Say if you have a name of a person and you know that the person lived in Gray County in a certain time period, and you know that which museum is located in Gray County. I don't see it on here. Maybe I forgot to put that one on there. But either way, say Owen Sound. Let's take Owen Sound. You live in Owen Sound and you know the person. Well, what you might want to do is contact the Gray Roots Museum and Archive, because that's located in Owen Sound, and they might have connections to people that you don't have, and they'll be able to guide you on the journey. I think the number one takeaway that I'd like everyone here to really get from what I'm saying is that use the people to guide you on your journey. You're not in an island of one. And I always go back to the freedom seekers who came here from the United States in the 19th century. Understand the way they get taken up in history. If we think of Harriet Tubman, Mary Ann Shadd Cary, there's so many of them. Historians isolate them as a person and they tell that personal narrative. Understand they were helped by people. They had a network. So the people who helped them on the quote unquote Underground Railroad were actually known as conductors. That's what they called them, because they would guide them on the journey. And what I'm saying to you is that you want to think of everything I'm saying to you as conductors. They're here to guide you on that personal journey so that you're not in it all by yourself. And then the next thing is this. I've sort of broken it down again to get you thinking strategically. Where do I go? Well, this is where you go. And when you go there, I would say to you, sometimes I understand it, because before I became this archivist extraordinaire, as people might think I am, although side note, I'm still figuring it out. I'm a student in this game. I was very intimidated by any kind of institution. I would think that I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to go. That's actually a very good place to begin. Use the confusion as your guiding force to develop questions to ask people, because again, that's part of the journey. And so if there are some sort of takeaways of this, also understand, often people don't know exactly what to look for. Here are what people would consider to be documenting histories. These are the things that people look for when it comes to documenting histories. And a lot of people don't realize, go to city directories. If you're unsure where a person lived, go to the city or the county will have directories where you can find people. And I always think of the Book of Negroes, right? That book that was from the 18th century was a kind of directory that somebody found because it was official record. So think about that. Anything that is official record is held in government archives of some kind. That could be on the city level, county level, provincial level. So that's actually the places where you want to go if you have official records. But maybe you don't. Maybe you want to look into the newspaper. Again, so many newspapers are now digital. So you can actually search them, and people get intimidated by that search bar. They say, what do I put in the search bar? Understand, keep it simple is what I have to say to you. If you're looking for someone whose name, for example, is Marge Thomas, I just made that up, right? Maybe you don't look for Marge, maybe that's a pet name. Look for Thomas. And then if you have a birth date, look for the date. So you have to start to scale things on a level that makes sense to you. What I'm basically saying here is make the journey personal. Don't make it this obtuse thing that seems bigger than you, because you're going to get intimidated and you might stop doing it because you get overwhelmed. But if you make it a personal journey, the most amazing films that I've ever seen in my life started with a personal journey that somebody just went on, and then it developed into this amazing creative thing. And so just to wrap here, documenting the archival record, understand that Black Canadians are connected to places and spaces, historically and in the contemporary. And I think one of the aims of this presentation here today is to give you that kind of sense of rootedness. We didn't all just arrive 5 minutes ago. We've been here a very long time, and we exist in many different kinds of communities. Also, we're connected. often there are African Canadians living in Ontario who have connected lineage with African Americans living, especially in the northern states of like New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And so rather than assume, often when people look in and they see an old picture of someone Black in Canada, they assume that they're African American. And they don't assume multi-generation rootedness in Canada. And I think that's what we want to shift, to start to see the historical record as and place Black people in that record, not as always coming from somewhere else. And then the last thing, understand I've been doing this work for over 10 years. Often the silences are hidden in plain sight. It's right there in front of you. It's just that nobody's noticed it. So our jobs, I actually believe that if you are alive today, I see it as our jobs as the stewards of people who have long passed to fill in those silences, to essentially speak for the people who no longer have a voice to speak, and to bring those stories into plain sight, because often there's no mysteries. They're all there. They're just almost waiting for someone to find them. So those are my words. I just have some little details of where you can reach me. I hope I wrapped up in enough time. I was I wasn't really keeping track, but thank you so much.
You actually have some extra time, don't worry.
Okay, perfect. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I can kind of just speak a little bit more broadly to some of the things that I'm saying. You know, I think as Black Canadians, we've been so trained to not see ourselves as part of the Canadian narrative. Like even when you're in school, there's like a disconnect when you're learning about Canadian history. It's almost like it's not about you, like you're learning about the country where you live, but you're not learning about yourself. And what I've tried to do in the last 10 years, and what I hope to keep doing for the next 10 years, is to realize that we can tell our own stories. Instead of waiting for the quote unquote dominant culture to include us, we can push ourselves in. And I always think of James Brown. James Brown had a credence that he lived by. He says, I don't need you to give me anything. I just need you to crack the door and I'll push myself in. And I think that's basically what we're here to do. We don't need anyone to give us anything, but to leave that door cracked so that we can open it for ourselves and find ourselves and start telling our own stories. And I think, you know, we often look to the African American context and say, look at them, they're so more advanced than us and they have so much more rootedness. Understand that a lot of what we think of as African American like history really didn't exist until the 1970s. There were people didn't learn African American history in school really until the 70s and 80s. And why is that? Well, some pioneers just decided they'd had enough of that. So they started to go into the archive and they started to find stories about Black playwrights, Black musicians, Black authors. You know, a lot of even the Harlem Renaissance that we know of today, it was really people who started writing in the 70s, 80s, and 90s about the Harlem Renaissance that people actually started to bring it into existence. And how did that happen? Because they found the documents. They found the histories that were hidden in plain sight. And so I think Canadians, Black Canadians, we're at a very interesting time where I almost want to say, and I've said this before, but I think it's true. I feel like we're kind of at our own renaissance where we're finally realizing that we have some really amazing talent that's been going on for 20, 30, 40 years that we now need to, you know, really bring into existence and kind of own and say, hey, you know, we really got some talent here that's not based on the African American story. And that's also not based on, you know, many of us might be second gen or third gen coming from a Caribbean lineage and or continental African lineage. So we have that sort of diasporic knowledge. But if you've been here now if you were born here and you're now in your 40s, I'm just saying, there's kind of a rootedness that you now have to recognize that what you're passing on to the generation behind me is a Black Canadianness that is what Homi Bhabha would call a third space, right? We've actually taken our ancestral lineage that is, yes, rooted Africa, the Americas, it's all rolled in, and now sort of taking form in Canada, we actually have both. That means we have cultural memory that extends our own lifetime. And what I always say to young students is use it. Don't see it as a burden, right? And I think sometimes they feel like they want to ignore their lineage because they're embarrassed by it. You just have to use it. That's really the takeaway. I don't know, I can keep talking if you want.
No, that's great. We will have some time afterwards for questions, but I did a couple wanted to mention a little something that you said. You talked about specifically looking at your region versus your city, and I think that's such an important thing to notice, is that like cities and town lines change, right? And so it's so important that we look at the bigger picture. As by looking at your county, you have a better sense of what's happened in your local area, than to look at Barrie, which may have been very, very small 100 years ago and is now, right, or like or there are new communities or new towns that are being built because of expansion. So I think that's so important that you speak to that, and that you recommend going to the county versus just the city to learn really truly what the local Black history and specifically is to that region.
Because
Thank you
often
for making note of that.
Because counties, as they've been like zoned, really haven't changed that much. But to your point, the city and town zoning, even over the last 20 years, you've seen things change and shift and all this stuff. So if you're looking for something, and you might not even exist anymore because now it's called something else. And I always think of like Mississauga in the GTA. Mississauga is actually a collection of 6 or 7 different towns that formed this Mississauga. So often if you're trying to find something in like Arundel, for example, Mississauga proper might not even have it, because it's at the county level they keep those historical records of those towns that no longer exist. So it's really about people having a better sense of geography and what I would call the mapping of race within those geographies.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to share, Dr. Thompson?
No, I mean, I think I try to just give a broad, sweeping sense of it all. And just the fact that, I never set out to be a historian. In fact, I remember when I was an undergrad, I wanted to study history, but I left the field because I just felt it was too white, to be honest. I couldn't see myself in it. And I felt like I was learning a lot of European history and sort of the dominant culture's history, but I wasn't learning enough about myself. And so from that exclusion kind of led me on a journey to find myself. So part of, I think, what the takeaway can be, often as Black, racialized, Indigenous, LGBTQ plus people, we tend to, rail against being excluded. Look, they're excluding us and we're not here. And what I'm trying to say is use that to find yourself. Just go on a lifelong journey of self-discovery. You don't have to be an academic to do that. You can do that in anything that you're in, any field that you're in, at any level. Finding yourself is how you create that legacy, so then people coming behind you will say, oh, look, there is something about me that I can read, or I can watch, or I can go and listen to an elder speak and see myself. And I say, do that work, and it just pays for itself. So now when somebody says that when someone tries to exclude me, my my move is, have you read my work? Because the same thing you're saying doesn't exist, I actually just wrote about it. So maybe you need to do some reading. And usually that person goes away because they realized that I pointed out that they don't know something. So so education, just quickly, doesn't have to come in formal settings. It really is just a lifelong journey to ask questions and to answer them.
Thank you. I do have one little comment, just that, so I was listening to your TED Talk, and you were speaking about attending McGill University and being told by a professor that your research was nothing and that you were nothing. I first want to praise you for stepping into your power in spite of those who thought less of you. and continuing on your path of telling stories of those who were typically voiceless. So thank you so much for doing this work. And a quick question. In 2021, you were a recipient of the Ontario Early Researchers Award. Can you tell us a little bit more about your project, Mapping Ontario's Black Archives Through Storytelling?
Yeah, so I'm working with Dr. Karen Cyrus, who's a postdoctoral fellow on the project, and we're essentially going to all the publicly funded archives, typically at the county level, but also at the city level, that are funded through the province. And we're creating an entire inventory of what they have that's Black Canadian history. I can tell you right now, we have about 3,200 records that we have created the catalog for, and we're maybe about 20% into the project. So I anticipate at the end of, and the first year is going to end in July. So at the end of next year, my estimate is that we're going to be able to inventory at least 15,000 to 18,000 records. And then all of that will be, we're working with the university library to actually create a database so that any person will be able to go to this database, look up their county or look up a name of a person. And if it's tagged, it will take you to that collection and you'll be able to see all the items that are in that collection. And also we're trying to kind of geo map it so that you can also see it in terms of space and place. Where is this archive located? And then what we're also trying to do is multi-tag that collection with other collections. So it will point you to the fact that this collection is also connected to something in Grey County, so that you'll know to the, oh, let me look up Grey County. So it's going to be, yeah, it's like an amazing journey that I'm on. And when we're ready to really release this, I think it's going to do a lot at the primary school level, secondary school, university, and of course, community.
That's incredible work. And I look forward to being able to witness it and be part of any way that we can uplift that history and share those stories through Uplift Black. Thank you so much for being here. We will have some time after Janie speaks for any questions that might come through for our attendees. So if you do have questions, feel free to share that. So next we have Janie. Are you there, Janie? Wonderful. Hi, Janie, how are you?
Wonderful.
Thank you. So happy to have you here. So a quick introduction. Janie Cooper Wilson has had a lifelong passion for history, researching and documenting Black history as a crucial part of the collective history of Ontario. She's a strong advocate for the preservation of endangered historical buildings and early cemeteries, and was the face of the intensive public relations initiative to preserve the 1849 Oro African Methodist Episcopal Church in Edgar, Ontario. Presently, Janie is attempting to save 3 crucial Black history sites in Haldimand County from obliteration. Janie is the founder and executive director of the Silversea Historical Society and was a driving force behind the restoration and designation of Bethel Union and the Old Zion Presbyterian cemeteries in Clairview Township, as well with the assistance of her dedicated Silver Shoe team. Janie has facilitated an annual memorial candlelight service for the past 2 decades. She's a sitting member of the Ontario Historical Society Board of Directors, serving as OHS Field Representative for Simcoe County, and as a co-chair of the OHS Cemetery Preservation and Defense Committee. Over her long career, Janie has been the author of numerous articles of publication and has been the recipient of many awards, such as the 2012 OHS Carnacan Award, 2015 OMAH Historical Reconstruction Award, and the 2018 OBHS Harriet Tubman Award. And in September 2018, she was inducted as one of the Canada's 100 accomplished Black women. You also have quite the resume. Thank you so much, Janie, for being here and sharing with us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to the organizers for your kind invitation to speak today. On behalf of the Ontario Historical Society's Board of Directors, I bring greetings and good wishes for continued success in the wonderful and important work that you're doing right here in Simcoe County. Truth, ladies and gentlemen, has a way of surfacing regardless of how well it may appear to be hidden from view. This is especially true in the case of our Black military personnel and the integral part that they played in the fledgling years of our country's history. It is my hope that my talk today will provide you with the incentive to delve deeper into this crucial part of our history. When the first wave of Black immigration into Upper Canada began 283 years ago, Black veterans who served Great Britain during the American Revolution received military land grants in the Niagara district of Upper Canada, where a Black community of about 200 people was established. Here, Black veterans resided with their families as free men and yeoman farmers, side by side with their white officers, fugitive slaves, and civilian loyalists who brought their slaves with them. The Niagara Black community sent Revolutionary War veteran Richard Pierpoint, one of their most revered community leaders, with a petition requesting the right to form an all-Black fighting unit in answer to the call to arms prior to the outbreak of the War of 1812. At first, their offer was denied, but by the summer of 1812, with a shortage of British troops on the ground due to the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the Colored Corps had been raised and was stationed at Fort George, opposite Fort Niagara. However, although they had been granted the right to Black NCOs, they had been placed under the command of white officers. These young Black men, many of whom were only teenagers at the time, including my own 3 times great-grandfather, Private Samuel Thomas of Oro, proved their mettle on the battlefield on the morning of October 13, 1812, when the Americans crossed into the British territory and attacked the village of Queenston. The Colored Corps, with their Indigenous brothers, rushed to the scene of the battle at Queenston Heights, circling around behind the Americans to man the captured British guns and quickly overwhelmed the enemy, turning the tide of the battle in favor of the British. The Americans were in such utter chaos due to their fear of the Indians and the Blacks that as a result, 900 of the 1,000 American invaders who actually participated in the invasion were captured. Although the Battle of Queenston Heights did not end the war with this one singular battle, that battle played a crucial role in the preservation of Upper Canada. By May of 1813, the Corps had been redesignated as a military construction unit and were attached to the British 41st Regiment of Foot and remained on active duty at Burlington Heights. They participated in the surprise British attack on the pursuing Americans at the Battle of Stony Creek, where they once again fought with distinction, beating back and pinning down the Americans. And following this battle, the Corps remained on duty at Fort George until the fall of 1813. By December of that same year, when Fort George was again reoccupied by the British, the Corps set to work at rebuilding it. The Corps is also credited with the construction of a new military stronghold we know today as Fort Mississauga. As part of Tucker's brigade, the Corps fought at the Battle of Lundy's Lane on July 25th, 1814. Now I got to jump in here because on the other side of my family, we knew little about the ancestor, and I assumed he was with Runchy's Corps. He was not. He was still a slave of an American officer, and he was wounded at the Battle of Lundy's Lane. He escaped around Christmas time, 1814. So I'm doubly proud. The Corps remained on duty at Fort Mississauga until March 24th, 1815, when most of the unit was mustered out. Sadly, while their white counterparts were hailed as the saviors of Canada, the significant contributions and sacrifices of the African, Canadian, and Indigenous warriors were conveniently relegated to minor footnotes in the history of our province. The colony established by Black veterans in Oro Township in 1819 was the only government-sponsored Black settlement in the province. It predated the Wilberforce settlement in Lucan by 11 years and in North Buxton by 20 years. An estimate of 15 of the 23 applications by veterans of the Colored Corps received land grants in Oro for settlement. However, only 9 of the 15 were present in the settlement when the provincial surveyor, Samuel Richardson, submitted his inhabitants report in 1831. Richardson's list included several notations indicating that certain Black settlers had never taken possession of their allotted land or had already left the area. In general, no specific reasons were given to explain their absence. However, close scrutiny of the associated land records leaves no question as to the reasons for these absences. But that's another story to be told when there's more time available. And I do get a little hot under the collar with that story. I grant you that. In October 1824, members of the Colored Corps was very visible and very, very proud to be given the great honor. It was the day they led the 3-hour procession that escorted the body of General Grant from Fort George to its final resting place on Queenston Heights. Black veterans of the Corps also formed the honor guard marching beside the horse-drawn hearse that was manned by a Black driver. 1824 also saw the Colored Corps beginning the construction of the Welland Canal that provided British ships with a more expedient access across between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Many former Black veterans and other African Canadian men also found employment as teamsters and stable hands and laborers all along the canal, and little settlements arose there as well. Port Dalhousie, as a matter of fact, was one of the places we used to go when I was a child for the emancipation celebration there. Later, during the rebellion of 1837-38, African Canadian men once again proved their loyalty to the Crown, and the veterans of the Colored Corps were the logical men to lead. Sir Francis Bond Head, then governor of Upper Canada, remarked, "They hastened as volunteers in wagon loads to the Niagara frontier to beg permission from me that in the intended attack upon Navy Island, they might be permitted the forlorn hope. In short, they supplicated that they might be allowed to be the foremost to defend the glorious institutions of Great Britain." Unfortunately, the right to full equality for non-whites, regardless of their service to their country, was never a serious consideration in the minds of the established ruling class of Upper Canada, many of whom were slaveholders. Subsequently, a distinctly anti-American political program of discriminatory racial propaganda was designed and deviously initiated to absolve the government of Canada of complicity in perpetuating the crime of slavery by the obliteration and marginalization of any positive reference to the existence, sacrifice, and contributions made by Canada's non-white citizens. This anomaly, this ugly, tragic, undeniable fact that began 283 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, must be acknowledged and recognized as the core root of the systemic racism that is so prevalent in our society today. The solemn promises of so-called benefactors were trampled into the mud formed by the dust of wearied feet, mixed with the tears of displaced and ostracized people. Likewise, it's understandable that the mistrust formed generations ago continues to be a source of much difficulty for Black and Indigenous leaders who proactively seek proactive change in today's society. Yet, in spite of widespread character assassination, racial discrimination, hardship, and betrayal, our Black and Indigenous veterans of the War of 1812 and their descendants tenaciously cling to their hard-won freedom and pride. Many of their sons returned to the United States to fight for the Union during the American Civil War. Again, I have another, my great-great-grandfather was one of those men that returned to fight in the American Civil War. Their grandsons and great-grandsons fought in both great world wars, and their great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren are presently enlisted in Canada's peacekeeping forces around the globe. To permit the memory and contributions of these heroic men to fade into obscurity or to corrupt their history with falsehoods is to disrespect their tremendous sacrifice and legacy. And it is a great insult to their descendants who venerate them as heroes. Let us honor them and speak their truth to power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janie. Thank you for sharing that. And you do have some extra time, so I'd like you to elaborate on the conversation about those settlers who didn't take their land. If you can share with us a little bit more about that.
Well, many were, they took land grants elsewhere. Now, grandfather Thomas, he was in Zora Township, which is just outside of Woodstock. And although he was a veteran, he sold that land and then purchased land here for £1 in Oral. Others, they arrived only to find that the land had been given to other people. Again, using my own ancestor as an example, his neighbor died of probably influenza, pneumonia, and his infant baby died within a month of each other. The wife was left on her own, and no one from the establishment came to check to see if this woman was still alive, if she was starving, how she was doing. And in the process of trying to finalize his property, Grandpa Thomas found out that the land had been switched. He was placed on the wrong land, and this happened all the time. He was placed on the wrong land, and this lady that lost her husband and baby, she was placed on the wrong land. So they switched. They eventually married. Then they had to prove that they were married. It wasn't accepted. That's only one of the horror stories. Property markers. Survey stakes were moved. If the settlers couldn't complete their settlement duties, and this was across the board for white settlers as well, the land would revert back to the government. But there was a lot of deviousness going on, and they were given the poorest land in Oral, And they were only given half of their correct allotment. There's even records of some of the Revolutionary War veterans, Black veterans, who were removed from the UEL list simply because of the color of their skin. And it just goes on and on and on. But unless you look at those records and read between the lines, the conquerors write the history books. So, and it's very hard for those that are just starting out, as Professor Thompson said, but you need to go through a process of introspection. You need to open your mind and be willing to accept the answers, whether it's good or bad. And what is the legacy? My dad used to say to me, you can't take out of the hide what's in the bone. And Shelley, you have heard me say that many times, and it is true. A lot of things were hidden. A lot of the ancestors didn't talk. A lot you will not find in those documents where everybody says, oh, they're supposed to be there. They may not necessarily be there, depending on what their life experiences were. They may have been too afraid to make themselves available to the census taker.
That makes sense. I think that still happens today.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Maybe they did not want to be found for whatever reason. And one of the things I find with children, especially, they have no idea the difference between the British emancipation and the American emancipation.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand that in between those years, my people were still hunted, even though we were considered free. And of course, the slave ancestry came through the women, which the establishment took our own proud Black African history, matriarchal society, and used it against us. Our Black military were used to put down our Indigenous brothers, to herd them onto reserves, because they sheltered us when we were running, trying to escape. And the young people, they do not understand that.
Absolutely.
First and foremost, a person needs to really ask themselves, why do I want to know? Is it just curiosity? But you've got to be prepared, because you're going to get hooked.
Absolutely. You hooked me in. You hooked me in, Janie.
Oh, I had you the first day.
Yeah, you did. You did. Yeah. One of the wonderful things that we were able to do that I just feel so honored was to be able to tour with you along some of these historical sites within Simcoe County, like the ones in Oro and Collingwood, Clearview Township, and Owen Sound. And it changed everything for me, learning, and I've continued to learn. And a big part of why I want to be part of this with band was to continue to learn my learning journey. And there's so much to learn, and I'm just like right here.
Well,
and we talk about that too.
One point I'd like to make here, I didn't even realize it when I started out. I knew, some of the ancestors came from Oro and some came from Old Sunnydale, which is now Clearview. And we were always very closely associated with Owen Sound and Artemisia Township at Priceville. But after I got involved and started searching, and not only for my own family, but others, helping others, because it's a matter, you got to pay it forward. If you don't, it's all for nothing. Mm-hmm. And I believe when the ancestors are ready, when they feel you're ready to receive that that legacy, that information, then and only then will you find the answers to what you're looking for. But what I discovered, all the main settlements, if you're, you know, a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th generation African Canadian, you're going to find relatives in each one of those sites.
For sure.
You know, because they were traveling people. They just kept moving on, moving on. It's like the blacks in Oro ended up, you'll find, as I explained to you when you were on tour, the men from Oro helped build the roads in that area. And when it started moving to the west, like starting with the Penetang Machine Road, moving west into the Blue Mountain area, they'd move. And so they ended up over in Sunnydale, working on this Sunnydale Road, and some stayed. Well, my folks stayed. So, and then you get into Virginia. And then sometimes, even when you've been doing it as long as I have, you get those, you know, oh my God moments. And that has been happening quite a bit to me in the last year.
You find, yeah, that was one question I was going to ask. With this movement, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, that's really, I think, awakened our Black communities, especially locally, to the fact that we just don't know enough, and and needing to dig deeper. I think there's been a lot more support. Do you find, you know, that the different channels of support, whether it be through government or historical society, has picked up on the need to dig a little further, and have you seen that information starting to come your way? And are you, exactly what you said, you know, a lot of things happening now that you're learning about?
In some ways, yes. In other ways, you know, they broke the mold when they made me. And I'm a big girl, and I've got my big girl panties on, and you know, no one gives you something for nothing.
Absolutely.
That just doesn't happen. And it's really difficult in many ways, because the children, and I look at all of you there today, you're children to me. The history only goes so far. And you've got to go, if you're trying to solve a problem, and whether we like it or not, as Canadians, we all say, oh, we have rights and yada, yada, yada. But the fact remains, anything that people of color and our Indigenous get, we've got to fight for. And we've been fighting for 283 years.
Absolutely.
And some people, like, I'm only going to beat my head against a brick wall so long, because, you know, I don't like to bleed. And some people, their minds are so closed that you can't reach out. And that, you know, these people are in government. If you're fortunate enough to get a politician that's willing to listen, that's great. But if their minds are closed, you know, it's just a constant struggle. And I sit here day after day saying, gee, didn't we go through this, you know, back in the 60s? Didn't my parents go through it in the 20s and the 30s?
Absolutely.
You know, and then the ancestors before that. Like, Lord, oh Lord, when?
It's true.
That is our lot. That is our lot. And, you know, you can't separate the establishment's history from our history. We're a part of it. And we just have to keep speaking the truth. If we try to fudge it, it's going to come back on us. So don't bother. Tell it like it is. Keep your integrity and move forward. Take what you want, leave the rest.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. As an elder, you know, in the community, it's so important that you know, we reach out to our elders and learn and carry forward, you know, carry forward this information and make sure that it's not lost again, right? And otherwise, what's the point of all these years of your work? So whatever we can do with Uplift Black to keep spreading that information, we really want to do that.
And
I
go
wanted
and
to just,
talk to the elders. Go and talk to
yes,
them. Sit
you
down
have to
and
talk
a
to them.
coffee with them. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah, take the
mask up.
time. Yeah, take the time.
Exactly.
Especially right now,
Exactly.
I think as we talked through the COVID pandemic, we lost so many. We lost so many of our elders. So
Right.
it's so important that we don't take that for granted and we take the time now and don't wait.
That's
As
right.
we move forward as activists, I can't think that I could do any of this work without you know, connecting with the elders in our community first. It doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel right without that. So thank you for inspiring me and helping me continue. I
Thank
do
you.
have a question for you. Okay, so it seems that your life work is dedicated to righting the wrongs of the past. In a Toronto Star article about the restoration of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Oro, where your great-great-grandparents were married, you said, growing up, I always knew I came from slaves, but other families kept it secret, especially since interracial marriages were common and lighter skinned children were seen to have a better chance in life if they stayed quiet about their heritage. You said it was a sign of the times, that they didn't just talk about it. Can you elaborate a little bit about that for us and how that you know, brought your work forward?
Well, it's true because I am mixed blood, obviously. I know my grandma, my mother's mother, she married a white man. And in many ways, she was ostracized both by the Black community and the white community,
Mhm.
you know. And my mom, she was what they refer to as a lily skin. And her sister, they were different as night and day. They were both lily skins. But my aunt, she chose to pass. You know, she
Yeah.
would rarely come into the black community, and if she did, she'd sneak in and sneak out. But it there again, it's what each of those women valued most, right? And it was a lot easier. Like even when I was young, I couldn't get a job in a dress store. Even when I was young and I was modeling, I came home, I couldn't get a job in a dress store in my hometown. And I'd been working for DuPont of Canada. Go figure. And I just said, well, already then. You know,
Absolutely.
you know, I don't need it. It you find a way. I was asked, well, with your background, why are you cleaning houses, or, you know, why are you working on the farm? And I was raised to believe if it's an honest day's work, you give an honest day work for an honest day's dollar, and nobody's giving me any garbage. I can go to my job, do my thing, come home. I'm cool with that. If I could provide for my family within the law, keep on the straight and narrow, that's all I ask. But that's me again. I've seen Black ancestors when I'm following up on their story, and little bits and pieces are revealed where some of their family members won't talk about, because they had no way to support themselves and their children. Well, there was no TV, no birth control. The babies kept coming, and those kids had to eat. Well, if a woman was nice looking and all she had was what God gave her, I don't knock that woman. I don't knock that
Survival.
woman at all.
It's survival.
That's right. and worse had happened to our women. And it's the women that is just the warriors. Black women are warriors. And nobody can tell me any difference. I'll go to my grave saying that.
I agree.
And if anybody, you know, that knows me, I can hear them chuckling now saying, yeah, cross Janie and watch what happens. Yeah. You know, it was a different world. And then I hear a lot from people say, well, why do you want to live in the past? It's not about living in the past. It's about learning from the past so you can move forward proactively into the future and guide your children effectively. You know, and kids today, a lot of them, they find themselves in trouble and they have no resource. And they forget the resource is bred into them. Whatever they are going through today is nothing to what our ancestors went through. And they may not have had money, but all those little lessons, it's like the Black woman that's fair and finds out all of a sudden she's Black. And then she's the expert. Hello. That doesn't cut ice with me. That old dog don't hunt anymore. You've got to do the footwork. 40,000 people are reported to come across that border, escaping the oppression of slavery, trying for a new life. And each one of them has a different story to tell. And there's a lesson to be learned in each one of those stories, even though they're very similar. So if you look at this person has a talent, or that person loves to work with horses, or has a passion for dogs, or, you know, whatever it is, that's been handed down. It's in your blood. So there's no pat answer for these things.
Just a quick note, just because this entire project is about, you know, Black and Canadian stories of service. So you talked a lot about, obviously, the past. Tell me a little bit about the importance of the work that's happening, where we're putting, like where Jackie, our artist, is putting color to these images of soldiers. Tell me a little bit about the importance of colorizing those photographs.
For me?
In general, like, yeah, tell me why that's important to actually show. Yeah.
I think it brings people, you know, a sense of reality. You know, a better sense of reality. It's like you go into a cemetery and you're looking at a tombstone. It's stone with writing on it, if you're lucky. Yeah. But people don't realize that beneath was a living human being. And they were placed here by the Creator for a reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just, I think you talked a lot too, just to add to that, when we went on our tour, about the unmarked graves, and I know that James also spoke about it, because I know there isn't a lot of conversation in our communities that I've heard about, you know, the unmarked graves, you know, of our community. And I think that, and James, you can also, like, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but, you know, with the unfortunate news happening across, you know, Canada about the residential schools and all those unmarked graves, and the access to the technology that's allowing the truth to be told. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that work that you've done with the cemeteries and your work, to be able to have those conversations about who is there and what their stories are.
Well, it's a process of elimination, really. It's a lot of work. In the unmarked, they may have been marked at one time, and back in the day, you know, most Black people didn't have any money. you know, and a lot of the old farmers didn't have any money. And you know, they would have a wooden grave marker, which you saw at Bethel.
Yeah.
And when that rots away, you've got nothing left. But you find out it's an estimate, looking at census records, you know, who was in the community, you know, you try and find death records. And that can be a challenge because before 1869, no death records.
There was no records. There's no records.
You know, and it's, you know, finding diaries and wills and things like that. And if they had anything to leave anybody, you know, and it's a long process. History is the same way. Either people love history or they don't. So if you hated history in school, you're going to hate it now.
I don't know if that's true, only because the history that we were taught was very whitewashed and, you know, and white centered. So I think that, you know, having conversations in different communities and different networks, it was really and I think that Dr. Cheryl Thompson said the same thing. There was no, you know, interest in learning more because it wasn't your story.
That's right.
And so I was one of those, you know, those students who even though I am somebody who does enjoy history and learning about the past, I never felt connected to the work and that was being taught in school. So I think that that's why we need to change. We have to decolonize the curriculum. We need to tell the truth so we can empower our youth to get more involved in keeping that history alive. And yeah, bringing in speakers like yourself and Dr. Cheryl Thompson, so we talk about the importance of our, you know, of gathering that information and finding out that information and then telling those stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me because what's going on in the US right now around critical race theory, for example. I saw a story just the other day and they were like, we don't want the white people to feel guilty about what's happened. And I'm thinking to myself, what's guilt got to do with it? We're just telling facts. Like history cannot be interpreted in a certain way. This happened. It's not about, and I loved what you said, that it's not about living in the past. It's about learning from it. Because how can you ever change anything if you don't know where things come from? It's just
true.
impossible.
But not only that, hey, you want to feel guilty? The shoe fits, honey, wear it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm like. What can I do with your guilt when I spent how many decades in school feeling completely like not only alienated from the work, but I would feel invisible. I remember sitting in a class again when I was a little kid, and my parents, my family comes from Jamaica, so the Caribbean. And I remember the one time they were talking about the Caribbean, and understand I grew up in Scarborough. So a lot of the students in the classroom who were Black were also of Caribbean lineage. This white woman was teaching us about the Caribbean and not even getting it right. And she never had any awareness to like that you had Caribbean students in your class. And the whole time we were like, this is Canada. They talk about us
invisible.
Yeah. It was as if we were invisible.
We're invisible.
I couldn't believe
it. I don't know
that was
about
30.
You.
That was 30 years ago. Okay.
I don't know about you, but I grew up an only child and a very lonely child. And the last thing I'm going to be is invisible. Yeah. You can't be an activist and be invisible.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being part of this work. We want to bring you back and be part of more of what we do with Uplift Black. So this will be just the starting of a long-term relationship. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you to Band. Thank you to TD for all your support. Reach out to upliftblack.org if you want to know more or check out Band Gallery. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.